Sanhedrin this week. Before we get started, let's go ahead and let's open up with prayer. Does anyone feel led to pray this morning? All right. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us here today. Thank you for allowing us to gather in fellowship, study your word, to praise your name. Thank you for the endless mercy and grace that you show us. I ask that you be with us all today, that we have open minds to the message you want us to hear, that we see what it is you want us to see, and that we may continue to look toward you and walk on the path that you provide for us. I ask that you be with us also, that we may praise your name and praise it more than we ever do. Your name is worthy of all the praise, and oftentimes our praise, we could praise more and more and more. And so I just ask that you be with us today, that we can continue to praise your name and continue to lift your name up on high and show your glory. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. All right, so we are on page 70 in our book. Page 70. All right, the Sanhedrin was a Jewish tribunal comprised of 70 members plus the high priest. The majority of the members were wealthy Sadducees, but some were Pharisees. John 11:47, Acts 23:6. They had the authority over internal affairs, especially alleged violations of the law of Moses. According to Jewish tradition, the origin of the Sanhedrin goes back to Moses' choosing of 70 elders to help with complaints, Numbers 11:16. During the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, a council of elders had limited authority over affairs related to the temple and Jerusalem. Ezra chapter 5 verses 3 through 5 and Nehemiah 2:16. The Sanhedrin of New Testament times apparently came into existence during the Greek period and continued as the governing body of the Jews through the Roman period. The Sanhedrin ceased to exist when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70. The Romans granted the Sanhedrin significant power over matters related to the law of Moses and the temple. After the raising of Lazarus, the Sanhedrin became alarmed at Jesus' soaring popularity. Caiaphas, the high priest, recommended the Sanhedrin get rid of him. John 11:49-57. But they were afraid to arrest him publicly. Matthew 21:46. Just before Passover, temple guards arrested Jesus at night and took him to Annas, who was the former high priest but had been removed from office by the Romans. John chapter 8 verses 12-24. Annas questioned Jesus, then sent him to Caiaphas, his son-in-law, and the actual high priest. John 18:24. After questioning Jesus, the full Sanhedrin found him guilty of blasphemy. Matthew 26:65-66. Because they apparently didn't have the authority to impose the death penalty, they turned Jesus over to Pilate on charge of sedition. John 18:31 and Matthew 27:1-2. After the resurrection, the Sanhedrin continued their opposition to the Jesus movement. The Sadducees ordered Peter and John arrested, and the Sanhedrin warned them to stop teaching about the resurrection. Acts 4:1-22. Because of the apostles' popularity with the people, all were arrested and flogged. Acts 5:17-42. Though the Sanhedrin didn't have the authority for capital punishment, they were able to stone Stephen to death. Acts 7:1-60. When Paul appeared before the Sanhedrin, he insulted the high priest and caused a violent argument between the Pharisees and Sadducees over the resurrection. Acts 23:1-10. A group of 40 fanatical Jews conspired with the high council to assassinate Paul. Acts 23:12-15. So we've been talking about Pharisees, about Sadducees, kind of what their roles were and stuff like that. And now we're looking here. We have the Sanhedrin. So this is kind of like, I think that's like the High Council, right? Everything, all the major decisions pretty much kind of go through them. And so what we'll look at is kind of a couple different things that are what we just read. Kind of talks about how they dealt with Jesus and didn't like what the book calls as the Jesus movement, and how the Pharisees and Sadducees played a role in that and stuff like that. But if we look too, it talks about how the Sanhedrin didn't really have the authority to put someone to death and stuff like that. But so they turned. That's why they turned him over to Pilate. So we're gonna go through a couple different scriptures in our Bible today, and I'll have some questions for you guys, just so that way we can kind of see what's kind of going on. There's kind of an overarching message too, that as I was going through this, it kind of just came, and we'll look at the end and stuff. So the first thing we're going to start at is John chapter 11. We're going to be in John chapter 11, and we're going to look at verses 45 to 54. Yep, John chapter 11. And it's verses 45 to 54. So while you're flipping there, the other thing to think of here is, so these people, when we say high council and stuff like that, these are people that are kind of in a sense of authority, right? In Jewish, with the Jewish people, it says the law of Moses goes through they're kind of the ones that help hold the law of Moses and stuff like that. And hopefully we'll start to kind of see too, as we go through this kind of shift and kind of mindset when it comes to things. Because if we think about it, before Jesus, everything was pretty much kind of about the law and law of Moses, right? The way you live, certain things like that. And Jesus we've talked about it, has talked a very different approach to life and stuff like that. Still honoring a lot of those things with the law, but loving your neighbor, different things like that. So, John chapter 11, verse 45. Therefore many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees convened the Sanhedrin and were saying, "What are we going to do, since this man is doing many signs? If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." One of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. You're not considering that it is to our advantage that one man should die for the people rather than the whole nation perish." He did not say this on his own, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to unite the scattered children of God. So from that day on, they plotted to kill him. Jesus therefore no longer walked openly among the Jews, but departed from there to the countryside near the wilderness, to a town called Ephraim, and he stayed there with the disciples. So we see here there are people coming, and basically the Sanhedrin are convened together. The Pharisees get the Sanhedrin together, and they're bringing this claim. They're being like, "What are you going to do since Jesus is doing so many signs?" Right? And in verse 47 it says, "What are we going to do since this man is doing so many signs? If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." So the first question as we kind of go through our book here, it says, why did Caiaphas recommend that the Sanhedrin get rid of Jesus? So as we read this, what was kind of Caiaphas' response? Like, why did he recommend that basically they get rid of Jesus here? Look in 49, this is where Caiaphas starts talking, right? It says, one of them, Caiaphas, who was a high priest that year, said to them. And if we look at it talks about how Caiaphas earlier had this prophecy that Jesus would die. And he was going to die for the nation, but not only for the nation, but also to unite the scattered children of God. But also, if we look, there's almost more of a little putting self over anything else. Like, let's let him do it. Because prior to that, in verse 50, it says, "You're not considering that it is to your advantage that one man should die for the people, rather than the whole nation perish." So if we take that, and we also take a little bit before that in verse 48, where it says the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation, right? So if we're reading through this, the Sanhedrin are clearly worried about their authority and their power in keeping it, right? They don't want views and things to change, because if people start believing in Jesus, right, then the whole idea of the Sanhedrin and stuff like that, it goes against the Sanhedrin, right? It goes against the Pharisees, it goes against the Sadducees and stuff like that. So there's almost this this pride in a sense, right? This idea that I want to keep this power, I want to keep this authority, we need to keep doing this sort of thing. And if we think back to what we've talked about past couple weeks and months and stuff like that, like Jesus questioned that with the Pharisees and Sadducees, right? He questioned this idea of he flat out calls them out, saying, well, you teach one way and you act a different way and stuff like that. So we see a couple different things here with it, that idea but I think the main overarching thing is that self, right? Which that kind of gets into this overarching theme that as I was reading through this, kind of came to me, this idea of how many times are we more concerned with ourself than what maybe Jesus is calling us to do, right? How many times when something's presented to us, do we worry about how we're going to look, or how we're going to act, or what's going to be said about us, or things like that? Thoughts? Any thoughts? Okay, we're a quiet bunch today. All right, let's turn to Luke 22. And we'll continue on with what we were kind of reading through in our book. We're going to go to Luke 22, and we're going to look at verses 66 to 71. So we start out where the Sanhedrin's convened, and they bring this question of Jesus and what should we do sort of thing. And now we're getting into Luke chapter 22, where Jesus is actually going to be put in front of the Sanhedrin. So Luke chapter 22, verses 66 to 71. So the end of Luke chapter 22. So starting at verse 66, when daylight came, the elders of the people, both the chief priests and the scribes, convened and brought him before their Sanhedrin. They said, "If you are the Messiah, tell us." But he said to them, "If I do tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God." They all asked, "Are you then the Son of God?" And he said to them, "You say that I am." Why do we need any more testimony, they said, since we've heard it ourselves from his mouth? So here we've got the Sanhedrin question Jesus whether he's the Messiah, right? So what are some thoughts of why do we think this high council, this Sanhedrin, refused to believe that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God? Any ideas? We've sort of talked about it a little bit already. But why do we think the Sanhedrin didn't believe that Jesus was, want to believe that Jesus was the Messiah and the Son of God?
Because there was others proclaiming, what there others that were saying that they were, saying that they were, I don't know necessarily the Son of God, but that the chosen one, the Messiah.
Okay.
Were there false?
Yeah, there's that. There's that. There were some instances where there were some false claims, things like that. The other thing too, does Jesus align with their agenda and their message and their goals and stuff like that? No. Remember, he completely I don't want to say completely, but he contradicts their teachings of the law of Moses, right? They're putting the law of Moses over everything, right? When the law of Moses came from God, and we should be putting God first, right? So the Sanhedrin here, no matter what Jesus doesn't want to believe Jesus because it threatens their power, their authority, it threatens their way of life, right? So let's think about this today then. How many times, have we tried talking to somebody, or we've seen somebody, and they just completely instantaneous, like, nope, can't do it, don't believe it, sort of thing, right? And that idea, because it threatens their way of life, right? In a sense, there's a comfortability in not believing and sinning, right? And that idea that, well, I'm content with my life, like it is what it is. So again, this idea of this self-image, right? This pride, this I know, I'm gonna stick with my way, sort of thing, because my way has to be right? Why believe in that? So it's one of those things. Like, again, we're called to follow Jesus. We're called to listen to his message. We know he's the Messiah, the Son of God, and stuff like that. But we're gonna face many times where we've talked to people, or we see people who just want to refuse to believe. And we're called to share his message and stuff like that. But no matter what the case is, there's nothing that we specifically can do that will save a person, right? God's the only person that can save a person. Isaiah 56:8, at the end it says, I will gather to them still others besides those already gathered. This is God talking. He said, I will gather, right? We're called. Now, this doesn't mean don't go out and share the message because we can't do anything. No, we're called to share the message. We're called to share the gospel. We're called to share God's love. But to think that our actions are what's going to save people, that's not the case, right? God will bring them, okay? And if it's an instance where you're put in a situation where clearly it looks like you're supposed to share the message and stuff like that, and you don't have to stress about the fact that, oh man, this person's not going to be saved now. No, that God has already lined them to be saved, right? You've just missed out the opportunity of being part of the glory of God and saving that person, right? And being the tool for God. So, we see the Sanhedrin convene, then the Sanhedrin are sitting here and they're questioning Jesus. And the funny thing is, if we look here, at the end it says, why do we need any more testimony, they said, since we've heard it ourselves from his mouth. Now, when I was reading this, does Jesus, when he's talking to the Sanhedrin, specifically say, I'm the Son of God, I'm the Messiah? No, he doesn't. which I found interesting and stuff like that, because he's like, if I tell you, you won't believe me. And if I ask you, right, you won't answer. And then he goes on to say, but from now on, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of the power of God. And they're like, okay, are you the Son of God? And he's like, you say that I am. Like, that was his response. You say that I am. And I feel like there's a moment there, though, that they realize it, because they say, well, why do we need any more testimony? We've heard it from him. He is. Like, there's got to be something in there. If they're threatened so much, there has to be a realization, right? So think about in your life, too, like some of those times, like maybe it was you coming back or the first time, like, there had to be some sort of spark in there, even though if you wanted to fight it, right? You had to know. Like, I know for me, I mean, growing up, I was in the church, and then I went down a different path for a while, right? But there were many times in that path where I'm like, I knew, I just didn't want to go that route, right? And it's one of those things, like, God will call us when it's our time, so. All right, so far, any questions, thoughts, anything like that? All right, let's continue on there. We're going to go into Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14. So we're going to be looking at verses, starting at verse 13. Starting at verse 53. 53.
What chapter?
Mark chapter 14, verse 53. Wait, did I write this down wrong? I did write it down wrong. Oh no, okay. Yeah, we're good. Yeah, Mark chapter 4. I'm just at the wrong page in my Bible. I'm like, there's not in verse 53. I was in Luke. So Mark chapter 14, verse 53. They led Jesus away to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes assembled. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the high priest's courtyard. He was sitting with the servants, warming himself by the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they could not find any. For many were giving false testimony against him, and the testimonies did not agree. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, stating, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple made by human hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made by hands.' Yet their testimony did not agree even on this." Stop there. So we see here now the Sanhedrin, who say that Jesus claims himself to be the Son of God, are now trying to find testimony, right? Because if you think back in that time, it wasn't just like necessarily that you couldn't just necessarily take one person's word on something. You needed multiple people's testimony, right? But they couldn't find a cohesive testimony here, right? To find something against Jesus. I mean, even here it says that we heard him say, "I will destroy this temple made by human hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made by hands." And then it says, "Yet their testimony did not agree even on this." Now, if we think, can't remember exactly when, but Jesus does talk about a temple being destroyed and rising again in 3 days, right?
Yeah.
But he's talking about himself, right? In a way, right? Yeah. He's going to die and rise again in 3 days. I mean, someone could correct me wrong. I don't know if at any point it says him saying, it does say that they didn't agree and the testimony was wrong, but the idea where it says, we're going to destroy this temple built by human hands, right? So they're trying to sit here and say, hey, this temple, this physical temple, he's going to destroy it, and then in 3 days it's going to be built back up, not by human hands, right? So they're grasping at straws here, trying to find anything to go against Jesus, right? And they're trying to find as many people or any testimony that they can that will go against them, but they can't, right? They're struggling to find that.
It seems though that their testimonies didn't so much contradict each other. They were saying exactly what he said he would do. It's just they just didn't believe or couldn't believe in the way it just didn't seem plausible to them. So they said, well, they must be wrong.
Yeah. It's also that idea, like, I think of, like, if you ever are in court or something and you get people sitting there, like, trying to, like, give a story, and they're like, at 6 o'clock, we did this. And then at 6:15, we did this. And then at 7, and then you get, like, so many people that say the exact same thing. I'm sorry, if I'm trying to remember something from, like, a year ago, let alone a week ago, I don't think me and my friends are all going to have the exact same words with the exact same like, my perspective is different than your perspective is different than your perspective, right? So all the stories should kind of like mismatch a little bit. Here they're all like perfect, so then it doesn't seem believable, kind of like what you're saying there, Sam. So again, they're grasping at straws. They're trying to find. In a way, they're trying to find this testimony, but they don't want to believe it. Just like you're saying, Sam. So then if we continue on and we look now at Acts, and we're going to go to Acts chapter 4. I know we're flipping through a lot of different places here today. Acts chapter 4. So at that point, they get the testimony and all that stuff. And they've already in their mind, they've decided, hey, we need to get rid of this guy. We're going to get rid of him. But it doesn't just end with him, right? What we read at the beginning, it talks about once Jesus was crucified, right? And once he was risen, what does the Sanhedrin then go do? When we read in our book here and stuff like that, after Jesus was crucified and resurrected, what did the Sanhedrin then go out and do? Do they end it there? They're like, oh, we killed Jesus. We're good. We're fine. Our power, our authorities, we're like fine. We're safe. What did they do after Jesus died and rose again? Were they dead?
For the disciples.
Exactly. They start going for anybody that's sharing Jesus' message. Just take him back for a second. Thank you. Yes, they were so concerned with their power and their authority that they weren't just worried now. Now they got rid of Jesus, right? But his message is still being shared, so now they have to go after that. And so we're here in Acts chapter 4, starting in verse 13. When they observed the boldness of Peter and John and realized that they were uneducated and untrained men, they were amazed and recognized that they had been with Jesus. And since they saw the man who had been healed standing with them, they had nothing to say in opposition. After they ordered them to leave the Sanhedrin, they conferred among themselves, saying, "What should we do with these men? For an obvious sign has been done through them, clear to everyone living in Jerusalem, and we cannot deny it. But so that this does not spread any further among the people, let's threaten them against speaking to anyone in this name again." So they called for them and ordered them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. So the Sanhedrin now has called Peter and John and said, "Look, you have to stop. You have to stop talking about Jesus." Right? Because they realize that if Jesus' message continues, their power, their authority, all that, what they believe is right, is going to be gone, right? But the amazing thing here is, so it says, so my question is, why was the council surprised with the boldness of Peter and John? And right off the bat it says, when they observed the boldness of Peter and John. So why were they surprised? Why do you think the Sanhedrin might have been surprised with the boldness of Peter and John? So again, why do you think, like, the fact that they're willing to just go out and teach, and actually they're articulating this message, and they're sharing God's love and stuff like that, and Jesus' message? Why? Anyone have any thoughts why we think the Sanhedrin might have been surprised with that?
They paid no attention to their authority. They weren't scared. They went on doing what they were.
Yeah, there's that. Yeah.
Jesus was crucified.
Jesus is already crucified. Like, yeah, Jesus is crucified, right? Someone has been put to death. Like, I know, like, if I'm following, like, if I'm, I don't know, listening to a college, let's just go college professor, why not? And I really like what they're saying, and I'm like, oh, this is cool, and I start, and then someone puts that guy to death because of what he was saying, like, I'm going to be scared to death to share what he was sharing, right? But Peter and John, they're out there sharing his message. Also, the other thing too is, let's think about this. Who are the main people that teach at that time? Well, in terms of like in the eyes of Jewish people, huh? I mean, yeah, the apostles are going on. I'm just talking like just Jewish teachings. Who normally, like rabbis, Pharisees, Sadducees, like people that are seen to be educated in the law, right? People that are seen to be educated in the law. And right here it says, they realized that they were uneducated and untrained men. Just common men, not trained in anything. They're not educated. Probably, like, in the eyes of the Pharisees and Sadducees and Sanhedrin, probably the kind of lowly in the Jewish community, right? Like, who are they to be going out and teaching people, right? But they're going out and teaching people, and they then say, and they see, for an obvious sign has been done through them, clear to everyone living in Jerusalem, and we cannot deny it. So these guys that are uneducated, they're untrained, clearly something has worked through them to where they can go out and articulate, and they can go out and share Jesus' message, right? Something has been done, and it's not anything they could do, right? Like, it's one of those things, I mean, even if we think we're educated, right? Like, I'd like to think I'm a pretty smart guy, but oftentimes I'm proved wrong. But I'd like to think I'm a smart guy and like I could articulate a message and stuff like that. But even when I'm trying to articulate a message, there's nothing that I can say or do that can really change someone's mind, right? So if we're looking here, if we remember, Jesus picked out the apostles for a specific reason, right? And he picked people that were going through things, that were seen lowly and stuff like that. And I see that as a sign of hope, right? Because I mean, when God came back into my life and Jesus changed my heart and stuff like that, like I was in a low spot. And if God can do that or Jesus can do that with the apostles, and God can do that with me, he can do that with anyone. He can do that with someone who's educated. He can do that with someone who is seen like they're in the dumps, right? All right, so the other thing we were going to look at after this is we're going to continue in Acts, and we were going to look, but we're running a little short on time. So we were going to look at basically the council was infuriated with the apostles, right? And they planned to kill the apostles. But a Pharisee named Gamaliel defended them, right? And it was this idea that prior to this, there were many times where people would go out and they'd share a message, like we were talking about, like the false prophets, stuff like that, and the false messiahs and stuff like that. And they'd go out and they'd preach a message, and then that person would die and everyone would scatter. And what... I lost my page. And what Gamaliel was basically saying was, well, look, You want to go out and persecute these apostles, right? Let's think back to history. If this is something of human, meaning if this is a false thing, Jesus is dead. This should then scatter. But if it doesn't, then it must be from God, and you are fighting against God then, right? And it goes to this idea that we're going to be persecuted. We're going to have things said to us, things done to us because we're Christians and we believe. Which gets us into our memory verse, which I will read our memory verse. And I'll just kind of end with a couple remarks after the memory verse. Our memory verse is John chapter 5, and it's verses 18 and 19. It says, "If the world hates you, understand that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of this world, the world would love you as its own. However, because you are not of the world, but I have chosen you out of it, the world hates you." So again, Jesus tells us that when we turn to Him and believe in Him and stuff like that, we're going to face things on a daily basis. People are going to say things, do things. We're going to face things from other people. But we need to continue our eyes and turn our eyes on Him and not be like the Sanhedrin and worry about our self-image, our self-worth, our self-pride, things like that. Because God has us in His hand, right? Before we close, anybody got any thoughts? We got a quick minute before we get upstairs. All right. Well, I hope this week everyone can really go out and live the path that God has put in front of you. Go out, share His love, share His gospel despite what people will say to you, despite what people might do. A great way to potentially do that, I'm going to start plugging it now. A great way to do that is going to be the fairs coming up.
Training June 5th.
Yeah, training June 5th.
6 days.
Or the other thing is I'm going to be trying to, or not trying to, I'm going to run one here. A CEF 5-day club, kind of like sort of like a VBS. So would love to have people come out and, but go even in your daily life. If it's something you can't do that, share it with a friend, share it with a stranger, share it with a neighbor you never talked to. Share God's love with people, all right? So with that, let's go upstairs, let's praise the Lord, let's sing loud, let's have a good Sunday.